Hi, it's James here from Food Matters, and welcome to this masterclass with Dr. David Jockers. He will be interviewed by Laurentine, and in this masterclass he is going to be talking about the importance of fasting and brain health and how you can use nutrition to improve autoimmune conditions. This is such a powerful topic, and he's such a great teacher. Make sure to please download the PDF so that you can take lots of notes. The more notes you take, the more you're going to lock in the learnings. I can't wait to hear what your biggest takeaways are in the comments after you finish this masterclass.
So here we go. Dr. David Jockers is a doctor of natural medicine and runs one of the most popular natural health websites, drjockers.com, which gets over 1 million monthly visitors. His work has been seen on popular media such as the Dr. Oz Show and Hallmark Home and Family. Dr. Jockers is a best-selling author of multiple books. He's a world-renowned expert in the area of ketosis, fasting, brain health, inflammation, and functional nutrition. And his expertise lies in helping people reverse autoimmune conditions. So thank you so much for coming on today. We have questions for you. All right, so this may be 101 for you, but we would like to learn more about what it actually means to have an autoimmune disease, because this is something that's coming up a lot more for all of us, but we would like to know the overall answer to that question.
Yeah, so when we think about autoimmune diseases, it's really where our body is actually attacking itself. And so we have to ask ourselves, why would our body attack itself? And really it has to do with the survival response that the body has. And so, typically, really our body is built for survival. So, if we have pathogens that are getting into our bloodstream, in fact, more people have died throughout the history of mankind from systemic infections, meaning pathogens that get into our bloodstream and then basically go throughout our bloodstream and into our vital organs like our brain and cause meningitis, or our let's say our lungs and cause pneumonia or something like that. So we get kind of this sepsis response, and that's what's killed more people throughout the history of mankind than anything else. In fact, our ancestors, they may have fallen from a tree or gotten some sort of trauma, and they didn't die from the trauma. Let's say they were hit by a spear, or an animal took a bite, or something like that. They were in a fight with an animal. They didn't typically die from the trauma itself. They died from the infection that came from the tissue damage. And so our body has adapted to create this inflammatory process. And inflammation, its job is to actually keep us alive. It's to keep the infection under control, protect it from getting into vital organs, and ultimately eliminate the infection so we can get back to our normal natural process of living. And so inflammation is really meant to be a short-term process. However, there are many different micro traumas that we're encountering in our society today, whether it's toxins, whether it's kind of stealth low-level infections that are seeping into our bloodstream on a continual basis, or it's chronic stress, or it's nutrient deficiencies and processed foods and things like that, where we're getting toxins that are getting into our system on a continual basis. Circadian rhythm disruption, that's another major factor. All these things end up pushing our body towards an inflammatory process. And when we go into an inflammatory process, we're either going to go typically into one of two pathways, particularly as we move from kind of a short-term acute inflammatory process, like if we sprain our ankle, and then into a long-term chronic inflammatory process. We move into these kind of two branches of our innate immune system. We have a Th1 and a Th2 branch. And so the Th2 is we typically think of with like things like allergies, or kind of like an accelerated histamine response, asthma, allergies, hay fever, those types of responses. Some people genetically, they go down that pathway. And then other people go down this pathway of what we call Th1 response, which is a cell-mediated response. And that's typically where we start getting autoimmune reactions, where the body will actually create antibodies to specific antigens. But those antigens, they look very similar to our own self-tissue, and our body will actually break down our own self-tissue. And so when I start to think about like root cause factors, with all autoimmune conditions, there are really three big things. One is genetics. However, genetics, all of us actually have some level of genetics that if we have an adaptive physiological response, if we're overloaded with toxicity, with stress, with circadian rhythm disruption, with nutrient deficiencies, all of us actually will express some level of autoimmunity in our body, some people more than others. And so depending on, what particular autoimmune condition somebody has, whether they have rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, lupus, inflammatory bowel syndrome, these are some of the most common ones, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, things like that. Those were, in a sense, imprinted into their genes. And if their system was overloaded with stress and toxicity, and this is the key factor, they had leaky gut or intestinal permeability. All autoimmune conditions, there's three major things. There's a genetic component, there is intestinal permeability, and then there is going to be some major stressor that they had that they just, in a sense, overwhelmed their system. And when all those three things happen, that's like the three-legged stool, then that triggers the autoimmune response in their system. And the reason why intestinal permeability is a big factor is because when the intestines, which are really one cell wall, and they're designed for our body to actually be able to take in nutrients. So throughout the history of mankind, we've had more issues with getting enough food and enough nutrients than having food abundance, right? In our society today, it's different. In our society today, if you're listening to this interview, more than likely you have food abundance. You have plenty of food around your house. You have plenty of food in your pantry to last you quite a long time. Our ancestors didn't have access that way. So oftentimes they would go many days without eating. So when they did have access to food, it was really important that whatever they put in their body, they were able to get the maximal amount of nutrients getting into their bloodstream as possible. And this is why our intestinal lining is only one cell wall, whereas like our skin has many different cells on top of each other as a protective barrier. Our intestinal lining actually, in a sense, even though it's inside of our body, our intestines, it's this tube that separates the external environment, which would be what's inside of our intestines. Even though it's inside of us, I know it seems counterintuitive, it's actually the external environment, from the internal environment, which would be our bloodstream. And so that one cell, right, that one cell lining is really important that stays intact so it can allow nutrients to pass through, but not allow pathogens, bad bacteria, parasites, yeast organisms, different endotoxins that are released, which are basically like bacterial end products. Something like lipopolysaccharides, LPS, which is an endotoxin released from certain types of bacteria. We want to make sure those don't end up into the bloodstream, or large undigested proteins from our diet, that doesn't seep into the bloodstream. Different toxins and chemicals don't seep into the bloodstream. Normally, a healthy intestinal lining can make sure that very few toxins get into the bloodstream, and that it's able to just maximize nutrient absorption and minimize the amount of toxins getting into the bloodstream. However, when that intestinal lining gets damaged, now a lot of these large undigested food particles, endotoxins, bacteria, fungal species, parasites, and toxins seep into the bloodstream, and those signal a danger response in the body, which activates the immune system, and we create this inflammatory response. Because again, the body does not want these pathogens, these toxins getting into vital organs, because that can kill us quickly. We can live a long time with a chronic inflammatory response in our body. We can live a long time with autoimmune condition inside of our body, but we can't live very long if a pathogen or major toxin gets in and causes significant damage to our brain, right? And causes brain damage. So that is really how an autoimmune disease develops. It's an adaptive physiological response to try to keep us alive so we can get to a place where we can then heal and ultimately put it into remission as long as we set the right environment. The unfortunate thing is, in our society, people have autoimmune conditions or chronic inflammatory conditions. They're not told that their behavior and their environment is actually triggering it. They're told that they have that it's solely genetic, and that they're given basically a medication or something to alleviate the symptoms without ever actually addressing the root cause factors. And therefore, they end up living with this condition for the rest of their life. And over time, it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Wow. Wow. You explained that so well. And it's true. There's a lot of people right now that they're going through their life. I guess you start off and we get busy with work, or you get busy with having kids, and you get busy with life, and you forget how important it is to look after your gut, right? And it's so beautifully explained that, the autoimmune condition is really, it's a lifesaver. It's our body trying to help itself. But this is why, before we actually go further into gut health, can you just explain to us, so the top three autoimmune conditions and how prevalent they are in our society, and how dangerous they really are? Because otherwise we wouldn't really worry too much about our gut. But the more and more people that I'm seeing getting autoimmune disease, they would have never had ever thought that they would be able to get this in the first place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Autoimmune diseases are really, really common. In fact, somewhere between 1 out of 8 to 1 out of 10. So, roughly about 10% of the population of westernized, industrialized countries are people, are individuals that have some level of autoimmune expression going on in their body and have been diagnosed. So in America, it's said that there's about 50 million people walking around with autoimmune disease. So extremely common, because in America, there's about 400 million people, right? So very, very common. Most common autoimmune conditions are lupus, which typically affects the skin. It affects joints. A lot of people with lupus have joint pain. They have skin. They have kind of a butterfly rash on their face. They can have issues with being exposed to hot and cold temperatures, things like that. They can have breathing problems. It can affect lupus. There's a wide range of symptoms that are associated with lupus, but generalized, they're going to have fatigue, oftentimes pain, skin issues, like a rosacea type look on their face. So that's really common with lupus. They can have breathing issues, like I was talking about. Rheumatoid arthritis, which we typically think of joint pain. In fact, rheumatoid arthritis can get to the point where the joints can become mangled, right? Like where the finger, your finger joint will actually be so disjointed, in a sense. Like one section will go in one direction, the other section will go in the other direction. I mean, completely destroys joints when it's not taken care of, when it's just allowed to cause damage in the body. So rheumatoid arthritis is really, really common. And then the third one is inflammatory bowel syndrome. So that would be ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. So a lot of people confuse irritable bowel, IBS, with inflammatory bowel disease. They are different, although there's a lot of similar symptoms. Irritable bowel syndrome is actually something I had in my early 20s, which was constipation, diarrhea, bloating, kind of like this conglomerate of digestive symptoms with no real known medical cause, right? So they couldn't find antibodies or anything like that, but you just don't feel good. You're not able to digest food effectively. And then inflammatory bowel disease, you actually have the diagnosis: ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease. Oftentimes there's blood in the stool. The body's literally attacking, and a Crohn's is typically either the distal part of the small intestine or the proximal part of the large intestine, or kind of a combination of that. And then with ulcerative colitis, it's usually the descending colon, which is kind of the later part of the colon. And with ulcerative colitis, you think these individuals are in a sense, when they go to the bathroom, blood is coming out on the back end. So this is really, really common, but there's over 100 different autoimmune conditions. Thyroid is common. Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is the most common cause of hypothyroidism. Hyperthyroidism, or Graves' disease, is very common as well. It's a growing condition. But autoimmune disease can affect basically every single system of the body can be affected by an autoimmune condition.
So this is why it's so important for us to be listening to you right now, because you have done the research, you've seen patients go through the other side, and you've also seen what typical medical physicians would prescribe, or even what you would say, the diagnosis that, okay, sorry, there's nothing we can do about this right now. This is a genetic issue, and you're going to have to learn to live with this issue. Now, is this true? Is autoimmune disease reversible?
Yeah, and this is a great question. In the medical system, typically you're given the diagnosis, and then typically they're going to give you a corticosteroid or some sort of a steroid. The reason why they give you the steroid is it suppresses the immune system. So what you're told is your immune system is not functioning well. We really don't know the root cause. It must just be genetic. And therefore, the best thing we can do is just suppress the immune system and just hope that it goes into remission, or at least that we're able to get enough of a relief of the symptoms that you're able to have less suffering. And, it's a compassionate approach to obviously try to help somebody ease their suffering. However, it's also a misguided approach. It perhaps good short term, but certainly misguided in the sense that corticosteroids have a lot of side effects. In fact, they actually cause more intestinal permeability. So one of the things that corticosteroids do is they cause a gapping in the intestinal lining. So they actually contribute to the root cause issue. And when you suppress the immune system, that's going to cause a higher incidence of developing infections, bacterial, viral infections, parasite infections, different things like that again are at the root of chronic inflammatory conditions. And you can also habituate to the dosage of the corticosteroid and therefore need larger and larger doses, which can cause a whole lot of different issues, including a drug dependency. So it's really not a good long-term answer. I understand short-term, maybe somebody's really suffering, do it short-term for the shortest period of time, but we really should be trying to get to the root cause and address the root cause. And we look at the root cause, we have to ask ourselves, okay, what is this person, when I think about chronic disease in general, I think toxicity or deficiency, or a combination of both typically. So is this individual toxic? What kind of toxins are they being exposed to on a regular basis? We look around in our society, most people, they're full of toxicity, right? We have something like 13 different pesticides that the average individual is urinating out every single time they go to the bathroom. We have 500 different, if you were to look at, and look at and measure all the different known toxins in our society, most people have over 500 different known carcinogens, known inflammatory triggers in their blood at any given time. And so, toxicity is a really, really big issue. And we're getting toxins from the food that we eat, from the air that we breathe, from the water that we drink. And so if we can reduce the exposure, you're never going to eliminate toxins in our society today, but we have to start by reducing the amount that goes in, and then improving all of our drainage and detoxification pathways, helping to support the liver, the lymphatic system, the colon. So we should be, in a sense, the way we eliminate toxins is we breathe them out, we urinate them out, we poop them out, or we sweat them out. So we need to open up all of those pathways and make sure that they're working properly. When I'm working with somebody, one of the key things is while they're awake, I like them to actually have an urge to have to urinate basically about every hour during during the day while they're awake. And people will say, well, Dr. Jockers, I got to go to the bathroom too much. This is crazy. And I'm like, well, that's good because you have to pee and poop your way to good health. We should be having 2 to 3 good bowel movements every single day to help eliminate these toxins. So we want to minimize the toxins going in, and then we want to make sure those drainage pathways are moving and that we're able to sweep a lot of these toxins out. We want to make sure that we're eating a diet that is full of nutrients, full of life-giving foods. So we get rid of processed foods. We get rid of known inflammatory agents. Some of the big things some of the big takeaways I say are, number one, get rid of sugar, grains, right? And any sort of processed type of food. Okay. So those foods, they're going to tend to have a higher toxic load. They're going to drive up your blood sugar. They're going to cause stagnicity with your detoxification pathways. We want to get rid of those. We want to get rid of bad fats. It's going to be things like corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, cottonseed oil, peanut oil, canola oil, all your refined seed oils, really toxic and inflammatory. And instead we switch to healthy fats. That's going to be things like avocados, extra virgin high polyphenol, extra virgin olive oil, coconut fats, grass-fed butter, grass-fed animal products, pasture-raised eggs. That's going to be your healthy fats, wild-caught fish, right? Fish oils. It's going to be healthy. And then the meat that we eat, if you're eating meat, you want to make sure that we switch from grain-fed, commercially raised, to grass-fed. They say it takes 3 to 5 pounds of commercially sprayed grains to produce 1 pound of conventionally raised beef. So you think it's bioaccumulation. If they're spraying all the pesticides and herbicides on the grains that the animals are eating, that's going in and it's congesting inside their cells And when we're consuming that meat, now it's getting inside of us. So make sure that if you're choosing to eat meat, which I personally do, make sure you're getting organic and ideally grass-fed, pasture-raised. When you do those three things, that's going to really help reduce the overall amount of toxins you're getting in from your food, from your diet. That's super critical. Getting water filtration, air filtration, also super helpful for reducing your overall toxic load. I need to be breathing clean air, right? We talked about respiration as a key way that we're minimizing our toxic load, and then making sure that we're urinating, right? So getting good, clean water, super critical. So we want to make sure we're doing that. And then doing things like getting out in the sun. Getting out in the sun on a regular basis. We know that vitamin D deficiency is a really big factor. Every single autoimmune condition, if you go in and you type in PubMed, or if you type in even on Google and you say vitamin D and lupus, vitamin D and ulcerative colitis, right? Any sort of autoimmune condition, anything that you're dealing with or family members dealing with, type in vitamin D in that condition, and you're going to find a number of different studies that show a correlation between that condition and vitamin D deficiency. Now, correlation is not causation. So does vitamin D deficiency cause those conditions? Not necessarily, but what we do know is that vitamin D deficiency, vitamin D plays such a critical role in the balance and the coordination of your immune system. So you think about it like if you're playing darts and you've got a bullseye on the dartboard, if you're very coordinated, you're going to get close to that bullseye, and that's good. That's what you want to do. If you're not coordinated, or let's say you're playing with a blindfold, you've never played before, you're just going to throw it into the wall and start hitting the wall. Well, when you are not getting good sun exposure or consuming vitamin D rich foods, let's say you're living in a northern atmosphere, you're not able to get sun exposure. Some of those atmospheres, people are eating things like cod liver, right, and different things that are naturally foods rich in vitamin D. So if you're not doing what you're supposed to do, right? So Eskimos, when they test Eskimos have good vitamin D. Well, they're not getting much sun, but they're eating cod liver, right? People near the, people who are living a natural lifestyle that are, in climates where they're able to get sun, they have good vitamin D levels because they're getting the sun exposure. So if we're doing those things, then that helps to balance that immune system. And so it gives you better coordination as you're throwing that dart. And better immune coordination means that your immune system has to use less energy in order to get the pathogens, in order to eliminate pathogens, eliminate toxins, and sweep them through the system, and without any collateral damage. And that's really what we want from our immune system. We want it to be deadly and effective, right? Like in a sense, silent but deadly, right? So kill what it needs to kill, but no collateral damage. And so vitamin D really helps support that. So getting good sun exposure, doing the things you need to do to help support your vitamin D, critical. So when I'm looking at vitamin D on a lab test, it should be between 60 and 100 nanograms per milliliter. So you should be testing your 25-hydroxy, 25-OH vitamin D. And I recommend testing at least twice a year. Usually you're going to see the lowest levels somewhere it really depends on where you're at in the world, right? If you're in a northern latitude, then usually the lowest levels are in like the early spring. And so that kind of late February, early March, a lot of people tend to get, triggers with their autoimmune symptoms. A lot of people will develop seasonal allergies, things like that. And so if they were to optimize their vitamin D, throughout the year, they would have less of those types of conditions. And so, so being really cognizant of your vitamin D, getting regular sun exposure, I think is one of the best things you can do. And sun exposure helps you way beyond just vitamin D, but that's just one of the key factors there. You can also look at things like zinc. And if you were to type in Google, zinc and rheumatoid arthritis, zinc and lupus, you're going to see another correlation between zinc deficiency and these autoimmune conditions. You could do the same with omega-3 fatty acids. If you were to look up omega-3s and, lupus, right? You're going to see research on some of these essential nutrients. And the reason why you'll see that is these are some of the nutrients that tend to be harder to get in with our kind of modern industrialized diets and lifestyles. Zinc, in order for our body to digest, number one, zinc is, in a lot of animal-based foods, seafood. You can also get it in some plant-based foods. I think pumpkin seeds would be the best source. But with plant-based foods, number one is you want to make sure that, like pumpkin seeds, you're going to digest the zinc best when it's sprouted pumpkin seeds. And with zinc, obviously grass-fed meats, things like that, eggs are good sources. People might be eating those foods, but because our society, we often eat food on the go. So we're eating, in a sense, we're eating fast food. Obviously, fast food, we don't recommend. That's not healthy. But we're eating fast. We're eating quickly. And when we eat quickly, we activate our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight nervous system. And that's not associated with good digestion. We need to be in a relaxed state in order to produce enough digestive juices, stomach acid, bile, and pancreatic enzymes, in order to digest and assimilate nutrients. Particularly zinc is really susceptible to poor digestion when we're not producing enough stomach acid. Most people out there, especially as they're getting older, and if they have poor digestive hygiene, they're eating on the go, they're eating in a stressed state, they're not going to produce the stomach acid that they need. And therefore, they're not going to be able to metabolize and digest and absorb zinc effectively. B12 can also be affected by that as well. Same with iron, magnesium, calcium, some of these key nutrients. And so, but zinc tends to be the most sensitive to the stomach acid production. And so we see oftentimes people are very, very low in zinc, and they respond well to zinc supplementation in that case if they are deficient in zinc. Omega-3 fatty acids in our society, most people are eating foods that are very high in inflammatory omega-6 fats, particularly processed forms, highly processed forms. We talked about all those bad oils, corn oil, soybean oil, all these seed oils, refined seed oils, very high in omega-6, low in omega-3. And the fat that's in them is actually, even if it has some omega-3s, it's actually damaged. So the fat itself, it's rancid. So you don't even get the benefits of any omega-3s that are in there. And it creates massive stress and damage to the cell membrane. And this is why a lot of these people also respond well when we change the fats, when we get them on a diet that's rich in things like extra virgin olive oil, where they're getting really good, stable monounsaturated fats, healthy saturated fats, and then also getting good quality long chain omega-3s, EPA and DHA in their diet from some sort of algae-based oil or consuming algae, or fish oil, krill oil, something along those lines. So these are just some of the associations between nutrient deficiencies. Those are some of the most common. We could talk about magnesium. We could talk about certain B vitamins, folate, vitamin B6, vitamin B12 that are very, very common. But if you start by taking your diet and getting rid of the processed foods, consuming real whole foods that are as nutrient dense as possible, getting them as organic as possible, and then relaxing your body so you're in a parasympathetic, you have higher parasympathetic tone, by taking a few deep breaths before your meal, by putting some herbs and spices on your food that are very aromatic, that smell good, that will actually activate your vagus nerve, which triggers the production of stomach acid, bile, pancreatic enzymes, by being in a state of gratitude. The idea of like praying before your meal. That's one of the healthiest things you can do, because that puts you in a state of gratitude, and that's activating that parasympathetic nervous system. So not only is it a great spiritual practice, but on top of that, it also actually really healthy for your digestive system, because it activates those digestive juices, which means you're going to absorb more nutrients from your food, and you're also going to eliminate more toxins. Stomach acid, bile actually helps to carry toxins out of the system through our feces. So that is what we want to do. Maximize nutrients, minimize toxins when it comes to our diet. There are many other factors we could talk about: stress, circadian rhythm, a lot of different factors we could talk about. And if you want to, obviously we can go down that road as well. But I say, start with, probably one of the easiest things to control, which is, the food that you're consuming and the way that you're consuming that food.
Well, I hope you're loving this masterclass so far. This topic about autoimmune conditions is so important, especially in this day and age. And this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the knowledge you'll be learning inside the Food Matters Nutrition Certification Program. We have an entire module dedicated to mastering autoimmune conditions. So important. And you'll be learning from some of the world's leading experts in the connection between the gut, the brain, and the autoimmune system, and how to reduce pain as well. So if this is something that touches you or your family, or if it's something that you'd like to help coach other people through, this knowledge is invaluable. Keep enjoying this masterclass, and I can't wait to hear what your takeaways are at the end.
Okay, that's really amazing. I love the way that you answer that. And it's so important, actually. The more, I mean, we've been doing this research as well for the last 20 years. And I hope you guys are all taking notes, because this information here today is so vital. But yeah, like autoimmune disease and nutrient deficiencies and allergies, it's so important to get tested. You know, we can go to our GP and get a test to see where our levels are at, and then we can see how out of alignment our zinc levels are, for example, or like you were saying, magnesium, or just being able to understand more about where our allergies are at and how they're affecting our gut health. Now, let's just go into some really practical things, So for those that are listening right now, and it's like sometimes it's all about habits, right? Yes, we can talk about lavish foods that we want to introduce into our diet, but a lot of people are not used to having that. For example, they would have a croissant for breakfast or a piece of toast with jam, and then for lunch they would have they're busy, so they don't have time to cook beautiful meals or home cooked cooking. They would have a sandwich with ham and cheese, and for pasta for dinner. So there's a lot of people that have these habits of, yes, this is the sort of type of diet that I've been eating since I was a kid. And, it reminds me of what my mom used to cook. And now they are told, okay, this is a diet and lifestyle illness. You need to change and reverse this by changing your diet and lifestyle. So what about for those that are just like really stuck in their ways? What would you say would be a beautiful breakfast or a beautiful lunch? What sort of foods would you turn to?
Yeah, this is a really great question. For some people, the idea of all of a sudden just taking out all of these foods that are promoting inflammation in their body just seems too daunting and too intimidating for them, whereas others are highly motivated, and so they're ready to get started right away. So you have to kind of look at your level of motivation, and obviously you want a plan that you're going to be successful at. So you try to figure out, which pathway is going to be best for me. And so for some individuals, I say just start by adding something that's healthy. So if you are eating, a bowl of Frosted Flakes or croissant for breakfast, maybe add in an organic apple with that meal, or half an avocado or something along those lines, right? You start by just adding something. And then the more that you're starting to eat real foods, the less that you're going to want the processed foods over time. So that's kind of the slow way to get to where we want to be. But it's still, everything's about progress. They say if a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a footstep, right? So you got to just take that step. Now, if I were to tailor out, okay, what is the best breakfast, lunch, and dinner? I would say what I always recommend is something that's very stabilizing on the blood sugar. One of the most stressful things that we deal with on a regular basis is blood sugar imbalances. And so when we're eating hyper palatable, ultra processed foods, these foods, they taste amazing, but they drive up our blood sugar. And then we release this hormone called insulin, and insulin's job is to get the sugar out of the bloodstream and into the cells. We know that sugar, when it's really high in the bloodstream, it binds to proteins in the bloodstream and creates something called advanced glycation end products, AGEs. What do you think that does to us? It accelerates the aging process. And so insulin tries to prevent against that. These sticky proteins are extremely inflammatory in the body. They actually cause, it's almost like shrapnel going through our bloodstream, damages the endothelial lining of our blood vessels, damages our kidneys. When you think about a diabetic that's uncontrolled, what ends up happening? They end up with peripheral neuropathy because their nerves become damaged. They can't even feel their feet. They end up with optic neuritis. They oftentimes lose their vision. They end up with kidney failure because the kidneys are just completely shredded. They oftentimes die of heart disease or heart attack because the endothelial lining of the blood vessels has become so damaged and there's so much scar tissue, plaque, and clotting in there that they end up having a heart attack. And that's because of the elevation in blood sugar. So insulin's job is to make sure that doesn't happen. Its job is to get the sugar into the cells. The problem is when we continually spike our blood sugar, spike our insulin, the cells become overstuffed and they become resistant to insulin. They don't want any more. They can't handle any more energy being put in. And so they're already very metabolically damaged. And so now we end up with higher and higher amounts of insulin. And insulin, when insulin is higher, it's going to promote more inflammation in the body. So, and then it also causes a stress response in the body when we have this high blood sugar followed by low blood sugar. So we want something that's very stabilizing for your blood sugar. So the three nutritional factors that are going to help stabilize your blood sugar the most are, number one, protein. Protein is the most satiating macronutrient. Healthy fats. So you want some sort of healthy fats, and you want fiber. So those are really the three big things. There are some other things we could add in, things like postbiotics, which come in fermented foods like apple cider vinegar, which can have a really great effect on stabilizing your blood sugar. But at least get those three things. And so I always recommend when you eat a meal, ideally you want to have about 30 grams, perhaps more, of protein, depending on your lean body mass, how active you are, if you're trying to build muscle tissue or not. But you want at least 30 grams of protein. Now, if you're under 100 pounds, you'd probably be fine with 20 to 25 grams. The average individual that's, let's say, up over 130 pounds, getting somewhere around 30 grams of protein is going to be really good. That's going to help stabilize your blood sugar. You want roughly about 15 to 30 grams of healthy fat, depending on how well you digest fat. Some people, they have congested bile ducts in their liver or their gallbladder. When they eat a larger amount of fat, they just feel really bad. Of course, the fat we want it to come from healthy sources, like I talked about: extra virgin olive oil, avocados, grass-fed butter, or coconut milk, or pasture-raised eggs, or something along those lines. Some sort of healthy fat source. And you have to see how well your body digests fat. For me, I can do higher amounts of fat, feel great. For another person, they're not going to feel good. Their gut's going to feel really inflamed and damaged. So kind of monitor the fat to see where you feel best. And then try to get phytonutrient-rich fruits and vegetables into your diet. So you want the fiber. And then also, with fruits and vegetables, you're going to end up with structured water. This structured water, this is one of the best benefits of eating water-rich fruit. This structured water gets into its, in a sense, high information water that gets into the cells and deeply hydrates the cells, brings electrolytes, brings all different types of nutrients into the cells. So it's more bioavailable. We get it in natural foods, so fruits and vegetables. So consuming some level of fruits and vegetables in each of your meal. They also have fiber, of course, which is good for detoxification, stabilizing your blood sugar. So many different benefits there. They're antioxidants. So, what's a meal with all of those things in it? Let's say having a veggie omelet with maybe a little bit of avocado, a little bit of extra virgin olive oil on it, and having some blueberries on the side. That would be a great example. Maybe a protein shake. Maybe you have a protein shake using coconut milk, kind of a lower fat version of coconut milk, or a diluted version of like a full fat coconut milk, because you don't want too much fat in that meal. Could be a little bit, could slow you down a little bit. But again, you want to get that 15 to 30 gram range. So having some protein powder in there, having berries. So maybe a half a cup of assorted berries in there, maybe partially a banana or some other fruit that you might want, pineapple, in that shake, and just making sure you're getting your protein, your fat, fiber, and phytonutrients. If you do that, you're going to feel good. That's going to feel really good. If you consume a meal like that, you don't feel good, more than likely you either had too much fat or perhaps you went really heavy on fruit. For some people, if they go real heavy on the fruit, they might have a blood sugar imbalance, right? So I recommend, I'm a huge advocate of fruit, but you do have to kind of monitor it. Some people do great with larger amounts of fruit. Some people don't do quite as good with larger amounts of fruit. So you kind of have to monitor that. Same thing with fat. Some people do great with higher amounts of fat. Some people don't do as good with higher amounts of fat. So you kind of have to tailor it to your body type. But the same quality of foods applies across the board. Now, of course, if you've had some sort of like a food sensitivity or an allergy to one of these foods, just take that out. For example, eggs are one of the most nutrient-dense foods you could put in your body. They're rich in omega-3 fats, healthy saturated fat, choline, which is one of the best things for bile flow for your brain, helps upregulate acetylcholine, which is your neurotransmitter for memory. It has CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, which is one of the best fats for your immune system, as well as your metabolism. Has fat-soluble vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin D, vitamin K2. from a nutrient perspective, a pasture-raised egg, honestly, you can't beat it. However, there are some individuals, and this is not uncommon, that have an immune reaction when they consume eggs, meaning that their immune system gets tagged and creates an inflammatory response. So in that case, it doesn't matter how nutrient dense the food is. If your body is creating an inflammatory response, you need to take that food out. So if you eat eggs and you don't feel good, avoid eating eggs maybe for a month or so before adding them back in, and then try it again and see if your immune system has adapted and, in a sense, has gotten more coordination and you're able to tolerate that food. So does that make sense? So there are a lot of people will talk about all these different superfoods, and then people try those foods, particularly people that have autoimmune conditions, and some of those foods they do not respond well to, but they hear somebody like me or you talking, and they're like, well, but they keep saying this is a good food, and they keep eating it, and they keep getting worse. So you have to see how your bio-individual response is to those particular foods as well. So I think that's super critical. But in general, I think if you follow the nutrient ratios I talked about, getting 30 grams of protein in your meal, somewhere between 15 to 30 grams of healthy fats in your meal, depending on how you tolerate fats, and getting fiber and phytonutrients into your diet, with each meal, I think that's super helpful. And then you can also add in something like fermented foods, like a little bit of sauerkraut or apple cider vinegar before a meal, or pickles, or something along those lines, because those foods have certain compounds in them. We call them postbiotics. They also have digestive enzymes. They also have a sour flavor. The sourness helps activate the vagus nerve to stimulate the production of stomach acid, bile, pancreatic enzymes, like we talked about before. The enzymes in there help with digestion. They also have certain compounds that help with the production of short-chain fatty acids, which are very anti-inflammatory in the body. So you're going to improve your digestive response when you're adding in things like that. So that's really kind of breaks down exactly how you want to look at your meals.
Yeah, I really like if we can just focus a little bit more on that, because traditionally, if we go back to how our ancestors used to eat, and the way that, perhaps your family used to eat when you grew up, or the ancestors before that, I mean, I'm from Holland originally, and I look at the way that I grew up and the people in my family line, how they would have eaten. It was very big on, I mean, Holland is a cold country. In the morning, we would have porridge with a big clump of butter, right? And there was like herring, and there was sardines, and there was always some sort of a sauerkraut or some fermented food like a kefir. Now that was our breakfast. And a lot of people, when you would eat like that here, perhaps in Australia, people look at you like, whoa, you're going to get fat eating that, right? It's like, oh my God, first of all, there's so much food there. But for us in Holland, it was a thing because, we would go out to school and we would have to bike ride in the snow. And it is like we're dealing with the effects of a cold country, and you need to look after yourself, and you may not have that much body fat. So you have to make sure your metabolism is burning the right fuels. So could you touch on some ways that our ancestors used to eat? Because sometimes we forget that, right? We forget that we come from a long lineage of families that have lived like off the land and have lived off culture, literally, and cultured foods. I'd love your insight on that.
Well, for sure. Well, of course, our ancestors were not eating ultra processed foods. So they may, if we look at what is a processed food, they may have smoked their meat, right? And that was a way of preserving the meat. And so it may have had some level of processing, but it wasn't an ultra processed food like Doritos or, Frito-Lay chips or something like that has this massive blood sugar spike. So they were eating real foods, whole real foods that may have had a little bit of processing or fermentation take place, which oftentimes in many cases actually made them more bioavailable and easier for our body to break down and digest. So that was a big factor with it. They were also eating food like, for example, the meat that they ate was wild game. So it was all animals that were, either eating grass, or they were living and they were, eating all different types of food that was around them. And what's interesting is when an animal's allowed to eat, like even a grass-fed cow, for example, if they're only eating kind of manicured grass, it's better than grains, but they don't develop their full nutritional profile, as opposed to if they're able to eat, all these different, weeds and wild herbs and different things like that. Research is showing, there's actually a researcher that's looking at this in detail, that the meat itself actually becomes rich in adaptogens, believe it or not, and all these different powerful antioxidant compounds, higher amounts of carnosine in it, carnitine, which are really powerful antioxidants that help support and protect the mitochondria. And so they were eating animals that were eating wild plants, and these wild plants had developed resilient factors, right? Because all these plants are trying to compete, and they have geographical stressors, they have pathogen stressors. So that's how plants develop phytonutrients, is they're trying to adapt for survival. And they're trying to adapt while they're around all these different pathogens, high heat, so a high amount of UV light that's perhaps damaging them. That's why blueberries are blue, right? They upregulated anthocyanins, these powerful antioxidants that protect them from the UV radiation. So when an animal is able to eat all these different types of, wild plants, their nutrient profile becomes a lot more healthy. And then, of course, when we're eating those plants, our nutrient profile becomes more healthy, as well as when we're eating those animal products. And so today's day and age, we end up getting plants that oftentimes are grown in farms or greenhouses that are more of like an artificial environment that minimize the amount of stress that the plant is under. And I understand why that's done. It gives a larger yield of the particular crop, or in a sense, it's easier to grow the animals. However, the meat and the produce is less resilient to stress and has less of a complete nutritional profile to it. Whereas when we're eating wild plants, particularly locally grown, fresh picked, we're going to get the most nutrient dense sources. And that's what our ancestors were doing. They weren't going to the grocery store and buying tomatoes that were, picked two weeks ago, right? That were grown in a greenhouse, and never exposed to, major stressors from nature. And so that wasn't what our ancestors did. So the way that our ancestors lived, definitely different the way we live. Obviously, we can mimic some of that. We can we want to take advantage of the comforts that we have, but at the same time, we can mimic some of that by growing some of our own food, growing some of your own maybe sprouts, or some of your own food in a garden can be helpful. Or go to a farmer's market, local farmer that perhaps it has more of these kind of wild elements and is not using herbicides and pesticides and things like that. So when you don't use herbicides and pesticides, now the plant itself has got to produce its own in order to compete with those weeds and those pests. Therefore, that's going to have more of a higher nutritional profile, more compounds that are better for the immune system, because that's what the plant is producing to protect itself. So by going to a farmer's market, by growing some of this stuff on your own, you're going to end up getting more nutrient dense food. That's going to be more in line with what our ancestors did. You mentioned consuming fermented foods. Every culture has fermented foods that they were commonly consumed. And when you look at like your typical, like if you go into like a real, authentic cuisine restaurant of, a particular culture, they usually have some sort of fermented food. Like, with sushi, they always have the fermented little pickled ginger. Now, oftentimes it can be processed too, but they're trying to mimic, what their ancestors and what the natural cuisine had, which was fermented ginger. So, so basically we can find these things in, every culture. And so it tells us that should be a staple part of our diet. And then also our ancestors didn't eat all the time. In our society, we're snacking all the time. We're eating ultra processed foods that throw off our blood sugar and cause a constant craving, right? And we're constantly craving food. Our ancestors, when they ate whole foods, nutrient dense foods that created more satiety. And oftentimes they would go longer periods of time without food because they didn't have access. If we go way back 500 plus years, they had very little food storage. And so, it wasn't uncommon for them to eat one meal in a day, or to sometimes have to go multiple days with very little food until they had a good hunt or a good harvest. And so they practiced a level of fasting or calorie restriction, not intentionally. They weren't saying, I want I'm going to fast because I want to increase my autophagy and my cellular healing like we do today, right? Or because I want to lose weight. They just did it because the food wasn't available as much. And that was kind of built into our blueprint. In fact, our body is actually better at handling times of famine than it is at handling times of feasting. Now, I think a good diet should have both, should have times where we are eating very little for a period of time and sometimes not at all, right? We might fast for 16 or 18 hours before we consume our meal. And then times where we are, in a sense, feasting, where we're getting, full calorie surplus, right? Consuming a good amount of calories for, the time of day or for the meal size. And that tells our body different signals, right? When we're in famine, when we're not consuming as much, we tell the body to break down old damaged cells and cellular organelles and to become more efficient. In a sense, it tells the body, clean up and repair. It's time to cleanse, detox, heal, and repair. When we're in a time of feasting, it tells the body, hey, this is a great environment for fertility, for activating more sex hormone, for activating more thyroid hormone to increase our metabolism and our libido, and to build muscle. And, in a sense, it tells our body different signals based on the information we're giving it. But if we're only in famine or if we're only in feasting, then we get the downside, right? We don't get the balance. And so we really should be cycling through periods where we're in famine, we're in feasting, we're in famine, we're in feasting. And then we really get the best benefits of both. We get the cleansing, healing, and repairing, but we also get the muscle tissue production, the proper release and efficiency of sex hormones, proper fertility, proper libido, right? We get all of these great benefits, and with stable blood sugar and stable insulin sensitivity. This is something that our ancestors did just based on seasonal availability of food. And today's day and age, because we have food all year round, which is a great thing, it's a beautiful thing, we don't have those same struggles, but we just have to be intentional with understanding that and applying that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So, Dr. Jockers, what I've heard you saying, so let's just do a little recap on autoimmune. So the importance of reversing autoimmune conditions are, first of all, looking at, let's talk about nutrient deficiencies, right? Looking at nutrient deficiencies. And we can do this by going to a GP and finding out what levels are our nutrients at, and then supplementing. Are you a big fan of supplementation, or are you a big fan of like, look, we can get this from our food, so let's try to get this from our food?
Yeah, I'd always say food and lifestyle first, right? I think supplements, they can play a role in your health, maybe maybe I would say a most 20% bump in your health if you get the right supplements and the right dosages. But, 80 to 90% of your health is going to be your diet and your lifestyle. So you have to dial that in first. Okay, supplements will never overweigh your diet and your lifestyle. And it's kind of like what I was saying. You can eat great foods, but if you're stressed out, you're not sleeping well, okay, you're not going to absorb those nutrients the way that you should. So you really have to look at your whole lifestyle and diet as one of the core components of it. But yes, supplements can play a helpful role. I've seen a lot of people with their lives really greatly improved by getting the proper supplementation as well.
Okay, fantastic. And for the listeners, if we want to, let's just do a recipe, one of your favorite recipes for cleansing. So we're going through our day, and we would like to have something like a smoothie or a juice or something that can cleanse us throughout our day. Is there something that you turn to, something, a drink that you turn to that you're like, yes, this is definitely a must every day?
It's not many calories in it, but some sort of good herbal tea. It could be dandelion tea, ginger tea. There's certain different types of herbs. That dandelion's a great one that help to open up the drainage pathways, help to activate the liver, kidneys. Just really, really helpful for the body. So I think that can be super supportive. Lemon water can be really helpful, particularly in the morning when you wake up. Some sort of warm lemon water, maybe a little bit of salt in there, super good for activating the vagus nerve, which actually helps to, it's cranial nerve 10, runs from the brainstem down into all your visceral organs, right? Your heart, your lungs, goes into your digestive tract as well, and it activates peristalsis, or the muscle motility of the intestines. And that's important for helping move your bowels. In fact, the time between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. is when your colon is most active. So you should be having 1 to 2 good bowel movements somewhere, in that time frame. That's a great setup for your day. When you move your bowels, not only do you get rid of, a lot of toxicity, you also help prevent against the over accumulation of endotoxins in your intestines. If you don't move your bowels and it sits in there, that feces rots, putrefies, and decays, and it becomes a breeding ground for bad bacteria. And you get a massive production of endotoxins that drive up inflammation and autoimmune activity. So super important that you're moving your bowels out every single day. Like I said, morning time is really the best time, but then you also may notice that you need to move your bowels, and this is normal and healthy, after a good meal. Okay, those are the 2 most active times you're going to have for moving your bowels, and you should be moving out all the feces, all the waste from your meals within 24 hours. Meaning, if I ate lunch today, and let's say I finished lunch by 2 o'clock this afternoon, I should have the waste from that meal out of my body by 2 o'clock tomorrow. If it sits in there any longer, it's going to cause, a lot of negative responses and drive up more inflammation in my system. So warm lemon water can be really helpful. Also, just going out and taking a walk sometimes in the morning. For some people, they respond really well to that. It's unique. You want to, actually, it's one of the things you want to master is, what is the best posture and activities that help you move your bowels in the morning? Your first hour after waking, one of your priorities should be getting 1, maybe even 2 good bowel movements that will set you up for such a more successful day. Some people do really well taking a walk. It helps activate everything. Some people, they need to sit still. Some people, they need to sit on their knees. Some people need to stand, right? So you want to find what works best for you. But what I have found is, across the board, most people do really well with some sort of warm beverage, warm herbal tea, warm lemon water, a little bit of sea salt in that can be really, really helpful. So those would be things that I would recommend.
And what is your take on juices, for example, or green barley grass, or sprouted kale grass, for example?
Yeah, I think all of those things can be helpful. I think that I think actually all of them are, in the health world, overhyped. I think that there can be benefit to them. And some people do great, some people don't. A lot of that's going to depend how well their body metabolizes things like oxalates. Some people metabolize it great. They feel really good consuming that. Some people don't, right? So, but I wouldn't say that, across the board, they're going to be great for everybody. And if you are doing some sort of like a juice or something like that, make sure it helps to hydrate your body. Hydrates your body, but also that it doesn't spike or throw off your blood sugar as well. So I think that's important as well. So I'm a fan of more of like a whole fruit than like a juice fruit, unless it's in some sort of a smoothie with, let's say, 30 grams of protein, some healthy fats, like I was talking about. Then I think it could be great. I think smoothies can be helpful as long as they have the protein and the fat in them, because it takes stress off your gut. We were talking about leaky gut, and when you're trying to heal leaky gut, if you're eating only solid food and you're eating a lot of solid food, it's kind of like walking on a sprained ankle, right? Even if the food's healthy, it's mechanical stress. Whereas a smoothie, the blender has done the digestion, right? So it's easier, less mechanical stress on your gut, which helps it to heal, right? And you're still getting a lot of good nutrients into your system. So I'm a fan of smoothies, not as much of a fan of juices. Now, if I have the opportunity to have some juice, I usually take advantage of that. And I have seen there's a lot of people out there that swear by it, and they've seen really good results. So, again, I say that if that's something that you feel really good with, go for it. If it's not, I would start with some of the basics like I talked about, and really try to master those basics.
Okay, yeah, that's really amazing. So yeah, thank you again. Thank you for your time, Dr. Jockers. We're getting to the end of our interview now. And I feel like we have gotten so much beautiful wisdom and nuggets and tips and tricks on how to reverse autoimmune conditions from you. So I'm very grateful.
Wow, what a masterclass. Thank you so much for staying until the end and learning just so much about the autoimmune condition, brain health, fasting, balancing blood sugar. And really, if you love learning about these topics like I do, studying nutrition was one of the biggest decisions I made in my life, and it completely changed the direction of my life. It helped me move from one career to another, to help me heal my father, regain that connection with my family, get him off 6 different medications. He lost 50 pounds. This was such a pivotal decision. One course completely changed the direction of my life, which has now inspired us after 15 years of running Food Matters to offer nutrition certification training. We are internationally accredited. Plus, the way that we design this learning program is that it fits in with you. You can do video, audio, you can vacuum the house and listen to these programs, or drive the car and be moving through your modules. Plus, there's quizzes and workbooks. It is so comprehensive. Over 50 world-class experts in your living room teaching you how to use nutrition and functional medicine to improve your life and to be qualified to help others do the same. We have a special offer available for a limited time only. You can click the link below the video on the banner to find out more about this intake and enrollment special. Have a beautiful day.